Hi, I often get asked, how do you join your work when you're working in the round and you want to avoid having that gap at the joint? So you could do your traditional, just go right ahead and knit. And I'm showing you how to do this with a magic loop, because more and more that's what people are using, a magic loop rather than the double pointed needles. So I finished casting on my stitches. I've divided them up in my needle, and now I'm ready to start knitting. So you could just go right ahead, pull your needle out and start knitting. But inevitably, when we do this, we end up with a gap between our stitches, between the beginning of the round and the end. You can pull tightly the right needle to your cable, and that'll close it a little. You can also keep your index on that stitch to keep the tension, or your thumb, so that as you knit, the tension stays there and it keeps it closed. But it's never going to be super tight or perfect. You're always going to have a little bit of a gap. So a lot of people don't like that one. Another technique that people use a lot is they cast on an extra stitch. So let's say you needed 40 stitches, you would cast on 41 stitches, and then you can knit two together. So let's say I have casted on my extra stitch, and I did a really tight job of these guys. Okay, let's say I've casted on 41 stitches, so I have 20 and then 21, and this is the extra stitch I cast on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this extra stitch I cast on onto my other needle where I have the beginning, and I'm going to knit this stitch and my extra stitch together. For us to be able to do this, we need another needle. Otherwise, it's really hard and you risk losing that stitch. So I just pull it right off and I come and put it right back on, put it onto my needle. There we go, I pull it snug. And now I have my first stitch I cast on, which is right here. I have my extra stitch I cast on, which is right here. And I just go ahead and knit those two together. So you won't have an extra stitch throughout your project. It's just, we're using that to anchor it closed together. So if I'm here and I knit that, and then I start knitting my project, whatever it is I need to do. So that also works. It closes off the gap a little bit more, but there's still a bit of a gap. There's something going on here, which, you know, eventually the more rows you knit, it'll disappear. My favorite way of doing this is by swapping my last stitch with my first stitch. So let me show you how I do that. I've split my yarn here. Let me see if I can even it out. Okay, there we go. So I have, again, my 40 stitches. And I'm just going to switch these two stitches, my last stitch with my first stitch. Always making sure my stitches are facing in the right direction. I'm going to grab my extra needle I have here, and I'm going to bring this stitch onto my other needle, my first cast on stitch onto my other needle. There we go. So that's my first stitch. I swapped from that needle to this needle, and I'm going to take my last cast on stitch over this stitch and onto my left needle. So I'm going to come and grab this, bring it over this needle and onto my other needle. I pull my working yarn, and then I pull my bottom needle out and I start working. Now, because I swapped it out, my working yarn is coming out from the top right now, but that's okay. I still need to work those stitches. It's coming out from here because that's my last stitch I just swapped over. So I'm going to go right ahead and start working. And I just knit across and do whatever I need to do. I find, although this is a little bit finicky, it gives you a really nice clean joint without too much extra fussiness or stuff going on down here. It's pretty tight and there isn't a lot going on. Okay, I hope that was helpful.